During my Sonic the Hedgehog video review, I told my story about getting a Sega Genesis for the first time. If you haven't watched that, go watch it now and then come back to this. As long as that story was, though, it wasn't the whole story. Before I had any console or handheld, I was 100% a PC gamer. And during those days, I spent a lot of time with my best friend, Andrew. We'd play anything we could get our hands on, though making Load Runner levels to challenge each other was definitely a favorite pastime of ours. But one day I went to his house, and he had a Sega Game Gear. Columns and Super Monaco GP and Mickey Mouse Castle of Illusion. And to be honest, I fell in love with it. I should note that the Game Gear version of Castle of Illusion is identical to the Master System version we're using here. But even on the small, blurry Game Gear screen, everything just worked perfectly. A brief story kicks us right into the game, and from the very first minute of gameplay, it's so obvious how spot on the controls are. One button jumps, one button initiates this butt-bouncing attack, which is also how you find hidden treasure chests scattered around the levels. And finding those chests is half the fun. Unearthing a hidden chest with health when you're on your last leg is so rewarding, and taking the time to discover all those chests is absolutely worth it. If you miss a platform here, it's totally your fault. Mickey moves at a good pace, and with few exceptions, controls here are fast and responsive. Similar to my experience replaying Sonic the Hedgehog, Castle of Illusion was a pretty hard game when I was young, but this time around, 90 minutes from start to finish, and it's packed to the brim with some of the best graphics and music on Sega's 8-bit system. It's a classic, but I have to admit, the final boss is infuriating until you learn the exact method of winning, because there's only one. So after a while, I was able to convince my parents to buy me a Game Gear. But back in those days, dead pixels on handhelds were prevalent, and even as a kid, they drove me crazy. My Game Gear had quite a few, so we returned it, and the store clerk at Electronics Boutique was amazing. We opened like 4 or 5 Game Gears in the store, and found that all of them had the same issue. Don't ask me how, but somehow that day, I went home with an Atari Lynx. I'm not sure of the details, I'm kind of fuzzy on that, but that ended up getting returned too, and I finally was convinced to get a Sega Genesis. Now, having fallen in love with Castle of Illusion on Sega Game Gear, I obviously had to get the Sega Genesis version. The reviews for it, and keep in mind this is 1990, pre-Sonic the Hedgehog days, they were amazing. But to be fair, retro gamers these days still hold this game in high regard. But my first experience was different. Obviously, the move from 8-bit to 16-bit visually was a dramatic improvement technically. 16-bit Mickey starts off in a much darker, eerier forest with deep layers of parallax scrolling and dramatic renditions of the 8-bit soundtracks. You can also pick up items in each stage to use as ammunition to throw at enemies. And all this comes together and gives you the impression that this might be a more robust version of 8-bit Mickey. And in many ways it is. Each level is comprised of 3 sections, often much different than the others visually and gameplay-wise. And the game will surprise you with various effects and boss battles far ahead of its time for the young Genesis. But ultimately, it's kind of all for naught, because Mickey moves like he's stuck in molasses. Whereas 8-bit Mickey was quick and agile, 16-bit Mickey is taking a casual stroll through the forest. There's no run button, and there's no momentum, and you feel this more than ever in every single jump. Mickey floats through the air like it's a Little Big Planet level, but he never makes it very far. This makes platforming and defeating enemies mind-bogglingly irritating. Does it get better? Well, yeah. You'll eventually acclimate to the super slow pace of the game, but far too often I found myself screaming at my television, calling the game cheap, and wondering why this game didn't play as well as its 8-bit counterpart. There's also no hidden treasure chest to find, so despite still containing some hidden paths, there are significantly fewer reasons to explore this beautiful world. So yes, they have the same name and some similar levels, but these two games are drastically different from each other. They both have their positives, for sure, but when it comes down to it, for me, the Master System version just blows away its 16-bit brother, putting my opinion squarely in the minority.